Thank you to our three speakers, Denis, Arrigo, and Benjamin. So we're going to add a couple more people to the mix here. And Arrigo, if you could pin our 7 speakers, including yourself. So I'm going to introduce the other 4 who have not given presentations, but were involved in the project. We have Jovana from the University of Belgrade, who's also a board member of Honey Bee Watch. Keith Browne, who's formerly of the University of Galway and formerly a Honey Bee Watch board member. Grace McCormack from University of Galway, who's also the project coordinator of Free Bee and an early supporter of Honey Bee Watch. And Andrzej Oleksa, who is from an unpronounceable Polish university, sorry, and a principal investigator of Free Bee. So thank you to our panelists for joining this talk. So the objective of this portion of the symposium is to spark conversation between our guests. So I'm going to attempt to ask questions that all of you can respond to, and hopefully that will lead to a dialogue amongst you. So I'm going to begin with a question that's kind of in the personal realm, something that might elicit emotion. So to our panelists, how does it make you feel professionally or personally or both that you contributed to the reclassification of wild Apis mellifera as endangered in the EU? Was this an accomplishment? Is this something that elicits pride?
May I start?
Yes, please.
May I? Sorry, let's see. Well, to answer briefly, it felt good. It definitely felt good to be able to accomplish something and to be able to use, well, first of all, to come together in a way for a common goal, and especially get to know others, get to know their point of view, and being able to kind of tie together the different perspective, the different views from different people, and putting them under the same goal, under the same umbrella. In a way, it definitely felt it was very positive feeling to be able to produce something that is recognized also at the high standards in a way, because IUCN Red List is something that has been used not just for bees but for many species. And I think it is a significant results. It was not completely, fulfilled maybe because there was that issue of not being listed at the end in the red list. But I would say it was definitely a positive achievement.
Yeah, I think for me too, quite proud of being involved. I remember being shocked when I read the 2014 report and realizing how little work was done on honeybees at the time and the lack of knowledge when to me it's such an important species. So also frustrated because of the continued dialogue around honeybees versus wild pollinators. And, we have a lot of work to do to encourage conservationists and whatever biologists and people and beekeepers and whatever to recognize the honeybee as first and foremost a wild species that is being put in boxes by people to manage them, but we never truly domesticate them. So it's a very complex environment. Ireland is very different from Central Europe in terms of the bee landscape. So yeah, proud, delighted, but also frustrated and enthusiastic to keep fighting the good fight. I think we need to be encouraging the IUCN to start looking at evolutionarily significant units and coming down within the species to start advocating for the conservation of local native subspecies and evolutionary significant groups, because the species, as we know, especially with the honeybee, it's so much more complicated, and by just having the umbrella of a subspecies, we're missing out on so much really important biodiversity that needs conservation action. So that's how I feel.
Yeah, I'd kind of reiterate what Grace said. I'm proud that I've come from, I started my PhD in 2014. So to be on my IUCN panel was a kind of a highlight of my career. But again, one of the disappointments for me was that it didn't go down as far as subspecies level, and we trashed all that out at the time, and we Denis put us straight that like the IUCN works at the species level. Whereas and we accepted that and got stuck in and came up with the goods at the end of the day. But behind all that, as Gray says, there's much more detail, and very specifically in the area of the movement of subspecies within Europe and what threat that actually causes. It adds an increased danger onto the survivability in the end of wild honeybee populations, because whilst we might see them surviving or a disappearing trend where they're disappearing off, what we're not actually seeing is what are the genetic changes that are occurring to those colonies. So the wild honeybee colonies that are surviving might still be changing genetically in a way that can possibly push them off cliff in terms of how they survive. They may not survive long enough into the future because they're no longer genetically adapted to the environment in which they're in as a result of the movement of subspecies. So that was my disappointment, that we couldn't fit that into the IUCN report. Hopefully, if we all get together, we'll be able to produce something about that in the near future.
Yeah, for me, this was okay, professionally, of course, it was really important. I had no idea how this IUCN assessment goes in practice. I read about it. I studied around many times about this process, but in practical terms, I learned a lot, because we are, I would say, a really broad international team that did this. And I was actually amazed how many things were similar in our so different environments, like what feedback we get from our colleagues that work in pollinator protection, what feedback we have from beekeepers. It was really similar. I was amazed. And I was really happy that I'm not alone with this. And for me, I know we didn't solve anything, which, we can discuss more. What does this actually mean? But I think this is the first and really important step.
Okay, so maybe me now. So I would say I am very proud to be a part of this assessment, and I have a very personal perspective towards free-living honeybee colonies. Because as Benjamin showed us during his presentation, I've been involved in research in old growth avenue trees, which represent key structure, providing natural nesting sites as tree hollows. So this experience has shaped my perspective on the ecology, on those free-living colonies and the ecological importance of hollow trees. So I hope that listing honeybees, free-living colonies of honeybees, will also contribute to protection of old growth trees and hollow trees in the agricultural landscapes and also in forests.
Okay, so I think then I continue. So yeah, I'm also very proud, and it's really nice to see that we could get this done, and that the honeybee is now has this endangered status in the European Union. But I also want to mention that like we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, and here I would like to especially mention you, Tom Seeley, who did this amazing work outside of Europe, so where the honeybee is not native. And I think without your work and your pioneering work on honeybee ecology, at least I would not be here. And as you could see in my slides, I did my PhD in Germany, and I'm living in Switzerland now. So that's where the wild living honeybees are not doing well. And so I think there is a long way to go, and we have to really find out what are the limiting factor of these colonies, especially in these German-speaking countries.
So thank you for your comments and personal kind of experiences. What I'd love to do is get you guys talking. So one of the questions that has been in my mind is, we had limited time, we had almost no resources for this. If we had unlimited resources, let's say for 2035 reassessment, what would you have done differently? Or, looking towards the future, what would you try to do to clarify the data deficient for the rest of Pan-Europe? And what would be some of the challenges?
I can give some maybe broad logistic challenges and what's the next step. So there are still for all the bees, there are still a lot of places where we need monitoring and we need people to do so. One of the challenge for the wild honeybees is this situation between wild species associated to the policy of biodiversity conservation and the policy on more agricultural sites with species that are managed. And there is no mention of the wild honeybees in the nature restoration law, for example, or the EU POMs. So they will be from next year, all the member states, they will they have to implement a monitoring of their pollinators, wild bees, non-wild honeybees, the butterflies and the hoverflies and the moth. And it's a pity that the wild honeybees are not there. So that could be one of the we already discussed of this. One of the goal of the team is to be able to some extent have a European program of monitoring that is supported by European institutions. That's what we're gonna have for the wild pollinators. And I think that in terms of tools, you're already there, meaning that you already have a very good level of expertise and the methods and the scientists there. What is really missing is the full data for the status at least. And then if we have even more money, like Infinite, Steve, working on the threats also, and then have the mechanistic explanation of what is happening, why there it's declining and why there is not declining, because the statue and trends, it's the first step, and then the next step is to understand why, and then do the action. I mean, of course, you can start the action now. We have a pretty good idea that the pesticides are not good for the bees, huh? But it's also important because the wild honeybees have such a unique ecology to also understand what are the specific threats for this species.
Denis, how come they were left out of the list of pollinators that needed to be monitored across the EU? Have you any idea?
How are they gonna do it?
Why were wild honeybees left out off the list?
So why that for the same reason that they wanted to remove the honeybees in the red list is because they want to work at the species level, and so as you have managed population that can be mixed with the wild feral population, they consider that the species overall is fine, so you don't need to have any policy regarding this conservation.
Who's advising them of that, though? The decision makers, the policy makers. Who's advising them that this is the way to go?
This is
sorry to pick on you.
Yeah, I mean, this is not me, but I think that it comes from a long fight to put the wild pollinators in front, while if you go back 20 years ago, we're only talking about the honeybees, and there were a lot of very good fights from the beekeepers regarding the pesticide and the neonic, for example. That was amazing. But like I like to call it, we were in the era of apidocentrism. Like you had the anthropocentrism for for the science of bees, you have apidocentrism. And so during 20 years, we had some work to do to put the wild pollinators and the ecosystem services associated to these wild pollinators. And so I think that all these people that did fight for this, now they think that talking about the wild honeybees is going back to this, to the honeybee-centered world.
Yeah,
I think it's the reason why.
We ran into the same problem here in Ireland in that it was always pointed out that there was only one honeybee species or subspecies within Ireland as opposed to the 99. We've got very few compared to Europe, but as opposed to the 99 other species. So it was always, there was always that battle, if you like, going on in the background. But yeah, I think it's whilst all the other species of bees need to be acknowledged, and yeah, maybe in the public consciousness, we need to move away from the sort of honeybee-centric thinking, because that was, people were just, to save pollinators, they were just increasing the number of honeybee colonies, which wasn't the way to go. The way to do that was to increase habitat and floral sources, etc. But I think, yeah, I think it's a retrograde step, though, given the knowledge that we now have, all the work, all the research that's been done, for the policymakers to simply stand on the species box and say, this is as far as we need to go. It's very short-sighted, and particularly given the acknowledged need for honeybees, for pollination services, for commercial crops.
Yeah.
I think it's cutting your throat in terms of food security, not to acknowledge the fact that it is the subspecies that are important for food security in a number of countries. They can't simply write it off. Again, I know this is not you. This is policymakers at the European level, but I think they're being very short-sighted about it. Really.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't feel guilty of this. Huh? I don't feel attacked. But it's indeed a bit paradoxal that let's say, I will say the we, even if it's not what I think, but we advocated for a long time, the diversity, and at some point they say, okay, now we won the concept of diversity, and so we cannot go one step further in terms of complexity and then talk about the wild honeybees. Well, actually, I think it makes sense all the way. We are making awareness towards the diversity of the wild pollinators. And in the wild pollinators, you have also the wild bees, the wild honeybees. So it's just one step more. So this is the step more that we need to do. Yeah.
And probably in a way, that's also to add something to your answer, Denis, about what to the question of see if granted unlimited resources, what will you do? What the next step will you do? And probably will be a lot of work on the community level, and because honeybees, managed honeybees have beekeepers, while honeybees mostly have researchers on their let's say, defending them in a way. So it's understandable. I mean, while I don't share this position, and in a way, I'm in agreement with Keith completely. But it's understandable, there are priorities. You need to make sure that there are guidelines and regulations that need to trickle down from the European level down to the different countries. And there are priority to solve. There are species that are not just endangered, but near extinct, or some of them over extinct or something like that. So there are priority to solve to that. So probably it's like trying to put down the fires first, and then try to do something later for when the problem will come for wild honeybees. Although, so from my point of view is that it's not good to stop here. I mean, if I understood something from all my work done in research, is that you cannot do anything alone. Like it's like the problem are way too complex. You need different perspective. You need help from networking and from help from people, the expertise of others. So I think a very good investment for the future will be to build a community, And that's in a way what we're, I would say, this sort of experiments that we are doing, this live experiment with this sort of symposia, bringing up topics that we find important or interesting and throwing it out there and see if there is anybody resonating with this, which I probably feel is the way to go. And probably so community, building a community is a good way to continue here, not just stopping on the research, but not stopping on the research, but building a community and the education side of things, especially on the beekeeper side. Because if we're talking about working on like having self-sustaining populations, start from, I would say, from the genetics. As Kit said, you need to have locally adapted bees, locally adapted genetics. The best way to do that, to ensure that is actually happening, is to make sure that we have people defending the local subspecies, local honeybee subspecies, and those are the beekeepers at the end of the day. So it's a very dangerous conversation sometimes, the or discussion when you hear wild bees being pitted against or like putted against managed honeybees. It is difficult to tackle, but we need to do it. And we need to do it in good number. We need to invite more people in the conversation and have more perspectives. Yeah.
And I have to say that this is what many of the people here are doing. Grace has got a study, Jovana has a study, Andrzej, Benjamin's been studying them for a while with free Bee Tree Monitor. So, the communities are forming very kind of nationally or regionally. And, what we're trying to do with Honeybee Watch is bring everybody together to share the resources, to come to these symposia and share the data and the findings, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to kind of move the conversation. There were a lot of challenges that we faced as assessors. And one thing that I'm seeing in some of the comments in the chat are people's questions about feral colonies and how do you know that they are in fact wild? So can people talk about this topic, because we debated it for a very long time?
Maybe I can start with just a prompt there, and probably the other will definitely fill in here. The way in which we started the conversation is that we started from what was written in 2014, of the definition of wild population, what it determined on how a wild population was determined, is that it was viewed as something genetically different from a managed population, right? So the idea was that there was a genetic distinction between those two populations. And that was incorrect, because it was considered a sort of an introgression between two different species in a way. That was the kind of paradigm that was incorrect. So the way in which we decided to kind of strip away that particular perspective is that we went back to defining just bees that we find living in the wild. So free living colonies or wild living colonies were basically the same, meaning defining the same thing. And based on the capacity of those colonies to survive, then determine their wildness, if you want to consider that. Because at the end of the day, Apis mellifera in Europe remain a wild species. So it's just that we are keeping it in boxes because for domestication is not, or at least from my the way in which I understand the concept of domestication hasn't been achieved fully in Apis mellifera in Europe. So they are considered still a wild species, right? It's just that they are managed or free living. But if you want, yeah, please go on.
Yeah, no, and I suppose even some of us evolutionary biologists in the group, like myself and Elise, would be interested in the idea of, if you have a population living in the wild, so free living population that's there for a while and surviving, that there may have an increase in particular alleles, particular genetic variants that are better able to survive in the wild, and you might have other variants that are associated with susceptibility and highly managed environment. Like, so And I think it depends on where you are. So I think in some places in Central Europe, the bees are the managed bees are highly selected for, and they may be managed to a much greater extent. In Ireland, like, we have beekeepers actually use wild swarms. There's less difference, I feel, in Ireland between wild and managed, even because beekeepers are using the long-term wild colonies. So we have now proven using genomics that lineages persist for more than 5 years in the wild, and some don't. So the same lineage. So in Ireland, we have this mix. Definitely it's a pan-mixed population, but we have local adaptation. I see somebody mentioned in the chat, I think it was Julie. We certainly have much greater differentiation between bees in Donegal and bees in Galway and bees in Tipperary. That's coming out of the analysis. But within each of those areas, wild and managed are freely mixing. And in fact, maybe in Ireland we have closer to wild type bees, because of the laissez-faire approach of Irish beekeepers, their interest in conservation, their interest in having a hive at the back of the garden and using that local stock that's in the wild in Ireland. So that's so again, I would agree with Arrigo that they are a wild species that we manage, some to greater extents and some to lesser extents. And we should remove the term feral from our dialogue.
Does anybody else have comments on wild, feral, or sorry, not feral, escapees? If
You're
not,
hanging yourself there, Steve.
yeah. So another question. Prior to the public release of our Red List report, and Denis is for all of Europe, we convened an ad hoc meeting to discuss the potential backlash of naming them as being endangered and how we should handle any ensuing controversy. So some people expressed concerns about, this potential misrepresentation or interpretation of wild versus managed versus domesticated, which is another term we don't like. Beekeepers potentially citing or claiming that managed populations were also endangered. Again, like we've discussed, that there's no way to genetically differentiate FLCs from managed colonies and populations. Somebody, I think it was Patrick, had commented that all managed populations at one point came from the wild and, are going back there. So, although none of this materialized really, do you still harbor some of these same concerns? And if so, how would you address them?
Yeah, I never had the concern, to be honest with you. I think beekeepers on a whole are a sensible group. They, once you give them the evidence, they will look at it, they'll weigh it up, and yeah, you might get asked questions about how you come to your conclusions, but I certainly was never concerned about sort of a backlash from the beekeeping community or anything like that. And in the end, it's a good thing that we talk about these things more so than anything else. If the sort of revised status of the wild honeybee does nothing more than sort of engender some more discussion, then that'll be more than almost adequate just to get the ball rolling and get more discussion about how we actually protect honeybees. And protecting wild honeybees is also going to protect managed stock at the end of the day. I'm convinced of it. It's all part of one population. To a lesser or greater extent, as Grace said, we're coming from an Irish perspective where it's definitely pan-mictic. All the bees mate with each other. There's no real segregation there, and that might happen more so in other European countries. But if we treat it all as one overarching resource, then we need a management plan. We need to be able to manage that resource, and that involves the beekeepers to a large extent. We're doing research. We're hopefully coming up with answers to questions. We're hopefully giving a clearer picture of what's happening. But when it comes down to it, it's going to be policymakers and it's going to be the beekeepers themselves. So any discussion that's prompted by thoughting is always a good thing, I think.
And sorry, Jovana, if I'm cutting you here, but I just wanted to add something that I think is useful for this is that we don't have, and probably for the audience at large, is that to consider that we don't have a plan B when it comes to pollinators. Honeybees are way too good for in their pollinator services. I mean, there are specific. I mean, Denis, please correct me if I'm wrong, but they are so generalist, and there are so many colonies, and there are so many in a colony that they're basically very efficient to be managed pollinators in a way. And we don't have a plan B for them, so that if the problem of colony losses, managed colony losses continue, that even though, of course, we have a higher number of colonies here, but the losses still continue. If the problem continues, then we're probably gonna arrive to the breaking point where the genetic is not that capable of, I don't know, adapting to it. And if we lose also the wild counterpart, we're probably gonna lose the capacity to sustain, to ensure food for future generations. Yeah. Sorry, just a parenthesis here. Sorry, Giovanna. Yeah, my Italian nature came out, interrupting
No, I
people.
don't know if
Sorry.
Denis wants to answer. I mean, in my experience, honeybees cannot be the only bee to do pollination. Maybe if we only look at the food we eat, and which is something I don't want to do. And also, it's a fact that honeybees do not want to visit. They are generalists, but they also choose. There are some, like peers or I don't know, others they don't like. And I don't think we should start this conversation in, yeah, one species will do it all, because it will not.
Good to know
But
that.
I agree that we need a wild part of any species in this planet for so many reasons. And yeah, I don't know if Denis wants to answer to this.
Yeah,
And then
please add it. Yeah.
Simon Potts is always talking about a team of players, like a football team, and for sure the honeybees can be the captain, because it's the center of many network of bee plant interaction, because it's abundant, because it's everywhere, because it's generalist for sure. So when you go a bit in the in crops or in orchards, you can see that the honeybees are really at the center of this. But I agree that if the goal is resilience and sustainability, we cannot rely on one only. And so everybody will be convinced here, and that's why I think that this result is also very important, because it's popular. Everybody can see the honeybees everywhere. It's also important for me that people connect with the biodiversity they are in the garden, and not something that is a panda somewhere, or the polar bear, which I like, of course. But when you are talking about nature conservation, for me, it speaks much more when you have insects that are there on the flowers in your garden, and the honeybees is one that you is the most likely to see. So it's still important, and really a sentinel for the conservation of nature, for sure.
I just want to add, so I think for me, I think the wild living honeybees, they're also a bit like a bioindicator. So while the managed honeybees, they can be fed by the beekeeper, and if something is not well in the environment, they can keep them alive. But with the free living colonies, we can really see what's happening in the environment.
And I think beekeepers in Ireland received, from the ones I know about, received the news very positively, because, as you've said, for them also, they know that genetic diversity is really important for colony health and colony diversity. So beekeepers are aware of the importance of free living colonies for resilience for their colonies and for genetic diversity, and also just this small result, it just, I suppose, underscores the importance of honeybee conservation. And sometimes honeybees are dismissed in terms of entomology and pollinator conservation because they're managed. So I think this does underscore that, hang on a minute, they are still important from a conservation perspective, and they do deserve that. So I that's why I'm very proud of being part of that. And I think beekeepers in Ireland recognise that, the importance of that. So it's been a positive thing.
Yes, and I think we should add that protecting free living colonies is also essential for conserving the broader gene pool of Apis mellifera, including also traits related to survival, to tolerance to pathogens, because we should remember that managed honeybees are subject to strong artificial selection, which can reduce natural genetic variation. And in this context, free living colonies are particularly important because they could retain those traits which are lost due to artificial selection in managed colonies.
100%, yes.
Yeah, I think with the, I mean, we all knew that whatever we end up when we started this process is not going to be perfect, because its IUCN criteriums are on species level, and we can all agree here that subspecies level is much more important. And the thing we can lose, actually, we will not lose honeybees, but we can lose these locally adapted populations and lineages. And I think this is something we all need to work moving forward to explain to beekeepers, to policymakers, to broader public. I don't know. Well, I mean, Steve asked this question, and you are also positive, and I have totally different experience in Serbia. I don't know, is it a attention span of 3 seconds? But when I try to explain what does this status means, they're somewhere. Honeybees are endangered, great. But I think we need to explain more what does this status means and what it doesn't mean. So I think the work is ahead of us. And yeah, I'm glad there's a lot of us working on this, because one person will not be able to do it.
Yes, 100%. It's so difficult to convey actually with the implication of it all and the complexity of it all, and especially maintain like the maybe the researcher perspective that you were able to maybe to maintain different controversy in the same when you consider the same argument, right? Sometimes people would just want a clear-cut answer, but I'm having actually experience of the contrary many times. People understanding, wanted to get to know more about the problem, get to know more about the complexity of it all, because it brings the problem closer to the general experience, right, of how of like day-to-day life is in a way. And I found that it's always worth investing in a long and good conversation about the problem, or what it means this, what it means that, especially with beekeepers, because they are very much interested in getting to understand, general beekeepers, the job that they are doing is because they love bees, they love honeybees. And inevitably, it's very, very difficult that you find somebody against doing something for the one population. So, yes.
Yeah, of course.
So I unfortunately have to interrupt the panel because we have so many questions. I've never seen a more active chat in any of our symposia. So, wow, I would like to shift gears. So thank you to all of you. Please stay. And what I'd like to do is start with a question from Felix. Question for Benjamin. How comparable were the data between the countries, and was there a method that had an impact on survival rates?
I mean, you can see that we had countries, or we had studies with a low number of nesting sites. For example, 30, and another study had 140, and also the amount of years differ. But still, I mean, we think that these studies are a good estimate, and we only took studies where the monitoring was on this regular basis, that we can assess annual survival rates. And I mean, interestingly enough, like for Germany, we have three studies that have very similar survival rate.
Thank you for answering that. Ian, how can we model for 10 years confidently, especially in the UK, when these data were based on a 3-year type study? I think he's referring to Ollie's study in Sussex. The UK example was stable at least one hive, but isn't that a big assumption? Can somebody else answer this about the 10-year projections and how we confidently project out?
I suppose maybe Benjamin can fill in, but probably it was the best data available at the time. And in general, I mean, Benjamin, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just, you know.
Yeah,
So
no, for sure.
Yeah, that is the issue. Sometimes, it would be best, of course, to have more data available, but it was Benjamin and Patrick did the best that they could based on what they had available, and it is not nothing, because producing that data, and if Ollie is present here, is not something that takes just a few days. It's quite a lot of work monitoring, and it's quite a lot of kilometers that you have to go here and there. But please, don't want to put words in your minds, guys.
Like for example, we took into consideration that there is some variation in each year, so we varied this annual population growth rate over this 10-year span. But of course, I mean, there's some uncertainty, and we need better and more data for sure.
Yeah, and that I think was one of the conclusions that we had after our IUCN reclassification, which is we need more data, we need more resources dedicated to this. Study them longer, study them more frequently, monitoring them, and finding more. We're only in, I think, 12 countries or something like that, Arrigo, and there's lots of data lacking in, especially in the Balkans, in the Baltic region, in Scandinavia, Western Russia. So,
and that there is a huge variability, not just in of course, the population, but also in the way managed honeybees are managed. As the example of Ireland that Grace was just speaking, is very, very different situation than what we have here in Italy.
I'd say as well, you can maybe Tom Seeley's work, even the proportion of, you can tell over time. So if you distinguish between founder colonies and established colonies, and the more data we have now that shows that once there's a high mortality loss maybe on founders depending on where they are, but once established, those colonies have a very good mortality rate generally. So once we have this information around, now we can prove using genomics that lineages do persist. So we get more of an idea as to what is surviving, and then looking at founder versus established, you can predict a little bit better. So I'm kind of referring directly to the question around how can you tell if it's just a three-year study, but if the bees are there for 3 years, it's likely that lineage will persist in time. It's not going to be the same colony will persist, but with the swarming events and daughters and granddaughters, great granddaughters surviving. So you can kind of start to look at that with the proportion after 3 years, the proportion surviving is likely to represent that survival capacity of that population. But we do need more data.
Okay, another issue we need to indicate is there are many subspecies of honeybees in Europe, and my impression is that M lineage range is overrepresented in those studies of free living colony survival. basically we have no data from sea lineage, except for maybe studies by Jovana from Serbia. There are no data about survival rate in O lineage, or maybe some sort of studies from Africa are available, but I can't say at the moment if those results which Benjamin showed us are representative for entire species, entire Apis mellifera, or only for M lineage bees.
Well, the German ones must be C, right? So they'd be
Yeah.
carnica, which
Okay.
probably aren't well adapted to living in the wild. That might be another reason why they're not surviving, is they're not native.
They may be not native sea lineage in Germany, but due climate change, now the climatic zones
So many
shifted
things
north,
change.
so maybe now it is like sea lineage conditions.
So our next question, Grace, you referenced him, and I believe Tom is still with us.
Yeah.
Tom, you asked a question of Benjamin. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask it directly?
Yeah, sure. My question to you, Benjamin, was whether you reported the probability of colony survival. And as Grace has just pointed out, I found it very important to distinguish between founder colonies and established colonies, because the probability I found of colony survival, wild colony survival, in their getting through their first year was only 0.20. After that, it got up close to, I think it was 0.79. And I was wondering if your results, how that factored into your analysis. I think because you found that the colonies were doing, I think, better than average, or better than I would have expected. So.
I mean, in Germany and in Switzerland, we don't see a difference between the founder and the established colonies in terms of survival.
Interesting.
Yeah, which was surprising.
I see. So thank you for letting us know that you actually made that distinction. Okay, yeah. It would be nice to know what the proportion, yeah, if that's the case, then you don't even need to know the proportions of those two types of colonies. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very different here. They just, these poor colonies, swarms, go out and they have to start from scratch. I wonder if building combs, trying to get food, and then they have to live through winters that go below minus 20 centigrade, things like that. Maybe that's a part of the difference, why it's different. Your findings are different from mine.
Thank you, Tom.
It also could be that honeybees aren't native to North America, so. And it's possibly they're just not adapted to it.
Oh, I don't think that's very likely. They've been here for 400 years. They've been hammered by natural selection, the wild colonies. Now, the point's well taken. There you've got breeders of bees out in California and so forth, and who knows what their breeding stock is adapted to. So I take your point. Good point.
Everything's been moved around much more so within North America than happens within Europe, where you've got slightly more isolated populations that are going, such as even the Carnica in Germany. Whilst they're not native there, they're not that so far away, and they've been heavily bred as well. But I just wonder whether or not that might have been a factor into the difference between the survival rates.
Yeah, I think one thing that I did, Keith, and I have the luxury of living in a part of the world where it's mostly woodlands, forests, and there are not many beekeepers. And there's a part of not too far from where I live, outside Cornell University, there's this vast forest land. It was cleared by, particularly by Irish folks that came in after the potato famine, but it was miserable soil. It was abandoned by the late 1800s. Early 1900s, grown back to forest. So there are not commercial beekeepers up in those areas. So I think I actually do have a population which has been had to face natural selection for at least a strong natural selection since that land was abandoned in probably about most of it by the 1880s. The genetics that we found, I'd have to go back in the papers. They even had, it was pretty interesting. It was not it was a combination of several of the subspecies from Europe. So Ligustica, mellifera, and I've forgotten what the third one, which was less well represented. But anyhow, I think, I do want to correct the perception that the data that I've collected was based on an area where the bees perhaps were not adapted. Okay. Not much natural selection on them.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Our next question comes from Tibubu, who is in Ethiopia. They simulate natural nesting cavities and do a honey harvest maybe once a year. So the question is, if bees are occupying these hives and are not considered free living because of this honey harvest, how should they be regarded after they abscond? When they leave and resettle in a natural cavity of their own choosing, do they then regain the status of fully free living colonies? Which is something that we've discussed as well, which is at what point do they revert back to being wild? So if anybody could talk about that.
I think we agree that if they abscond and choose the nest site themselves and live in the wild and overwinter, I guess, that they survive, then they're free living, right?
Yes, that was the point of like of it was a part like a perspective thing, like because we have this huge group with this huge I don't know, so category, which is like the species, and the species is wild. It just inside just the slide from Benjamin at the beginning of his presentation, inside this big bucket or this big category, you have these two different subpopulations that they different themselves by the way in which they live. You have the managed part and the free living part. So if a colony goes up and lives in the wild by itself, nest whatever the colony decides, and is managed or receive little to no management, because it could be that you're I don't know, there are some influences, of course. Now anthropogenic effects are everywhere, then you can consider that as a free living colony. So yes.
I mean, I think in large parts of the world, colonies, either managed or not, I mean, they're all coming from the wild. So, I mean, we have a bit this European and North African perspective, but I guess in Africa, like the whole population is wild, and management is just trapping swarms and, doing some very low intensity honey harvesting.
We have another question from Africa, from Robert in Zimbabwe. And I think maybe you guys addressed this, but I'm going to ask it. In Africa, we have lots of wild colonies being caught as swarms that are then managed in different types of beehives. During the swarming period, swarms are caught, and it is not easy to identify whether the swarms came from managed colonies or free-living colonies. Bee species we have easily swarm and also have a high absconding rate. Colonies can easily nest in natural hives and those that are man-made. Beekeepers doing forest beekeeping get honey from FLCs and managed colonies. I guess that's just an observation. Ian asks, when looking at new colonies, isn't there a distinction to be made between a prime swarm and a secondary swarm? We generally assume that nearly all prime swarms will make it, but a lot of secondary swarms are just preparing a nest for later years and won't make it through the winter. Have people made those observations? Grace gives a thumbs up. I seem to have caught up on all the questions, but I have a question that I was not able to ask during the panel, and I think it's a perfect question to end with. So now that Apis mellifera has been categorized, at least in the EU, what does this status confer onto the species? So in other words, what does it mean when a species receives a threatened status? On the IUCN website, they say the Red List is a critical indicator of the health of the world's biodiversity. It is a powerful tool to inform and catalyze action for biodiversity conservation and policy change, critical to protecting the natural resources we need to survive, which to me implies that the IUCN possesses no governmental authority nor can enforce the conservation of threatened species. So what are your thoughts about this? And Denny, you probably have the most informed opinion on this.
Yes. So it depends. So it's not a legal binding tool. So it's more like something that you can use when you need to develop some actions with priorities, and then you can take the decision, okay, we're gonna implement this action for biodiversity conservation, and the priority will be threatened species. And so in this case, wild honeybees can be one of the group where there is a specific action on. But it's not automatic. There is no legal binding. What is happening in some of the countries is that there is a national group working with the IUCN methodology, and when it's red listed through this group, then it's automatically associated to legal constraint. But it's not in every countries, and it's not IUCN itself. It's really it's always through public institution, public research center, or public body.
Yeah, I would say like what both of you already said. It's not automatically anything, but I think now they're not like any species that has this serious status. It's not invisible anymore, and you can base, I don't know, future projects or studies based on it. So I think it gives a certain scientific recognition, I would say, visibility, and it's, I don't know, states that there is a problem that you can work on. Before, like if you ask me, the data deficient status is the most sad one, even more than endangered, because you cannot do anything with data deficient. And when you say, okay, it's endangered, we have data for this many countries, we don't have data for this is okay, now we will organize and do something. So I think this is like, although it's not concretely anything, I think it's everything. So it's a base. Yeah.
I
Yes.
100% agree, yes.
I agree with Jovana that the red list status often motivates further studies on population size, on distribution, on threats. So soon I expect we will have more data about free living colonies. And it is very good because we will be better informed for next assessment within IUCN in the future.
And I think in Ireland, we are pushing for the protection of the native Irish honeybee bill 2021, trying to get to ban imports of invasive subspecies into Ireland, because it's good to know that Ligustica and Carnica are regarded by the EU as invasive species, Denny. So in Ireland they will be invasive species. And so the IUCN, this decision is really important because it will be added to the issues around introgression, and the fact that Ireland has is probably the last stronghold of Apis mellifera in Europe, and we have wild bees surviving in the wild and being used by beekeepers. It's a very, very important population now and should be conserved. So this IUCN decision will play a role in how Irish beekeepers and politicians will fight to protect the population that we have. So it will be used in that manner as well.
Super. Yeah, 100% agree. And sorry, Steve, I know you probably want to close here, but I just wanted to say a big thank you first of all, to everybody here, and to come here, and the assessors, but also to the data contributors, or anybody actually that paid attention to this project. Because if we arrive to this point, it's thanks to a little push from everybody in the same direction. This report, I very much hope it's gonna get the ball rolling for the conversation around at least on honeybees and increase the complexity or like the understanding, let's say, of the complexity of the problem by a larger audience, but that we can get something done, something meaningful done for the wild species. So yeah.
And I just saw that Tibibu has a comment in the chat, which is a lot of this seems to be centered around Europe. And just quickly, Denis, are there red lists on other continents? I assume so.
At the regional level, not yet. There are some work going on for North America, but more at the national level, I think, than not the continental level. So
Okay.
Europe is the only one so far. On the other side, there are some national red lists that are going on. And so I just mentioned in the chat that was one of the points of Arrigo. So indeed, this data that we collect, we can also use it at the national level in the other way. And so next week, we're going to have a meeting for France because we finished the red list for the wild bees of France, the assessment. And so now we're going to have a special session for the wild honeybees with Fabrice Requier, who was one of the experts of your team. So I think that it will stimulate also this national level assessments that now we saw that it's possible at the European level. It's going to motivate people. And also at this level, at the national level, I think that this is where we can have the most powerful element in terms of policy. We will work on the European one. Eventually, they will come this step for the wild honeybees, but probably at the national level, they will have less problem of considering these wild honeybees, and so we can maybe work better on this.
At a
Great.
national
Thank
level,
you.
Denis, does it work that you look at subspecies, or is it still only at a species level?
I mean, IUCN is never subspecies, but you can have some national.
I've seen IUCN reports on
Yes.
subspecies.
So you can have you can do whatever you want, you can do subspecies, and there are some examples, and so at the national level, if there is some question regarding some subspecies, I think that it's totally okay.
So I hate to interrupt and abruptly end this, but we have run out of time. So thank you for your questions from the audience, and thank you to our panelists. This has been a great conversation and really a culmination of a lot of work from a lot of people. So bravo, I see lots of clapping hands going on the screen. In conclusion, we're going to continue this conversation in the fall. We have another conversation called What's Next? And we'll talk about policy change and educational campaigns and other types of steps that we can take. And then before that, on June 18th, we're actually going to be meeting with 4 tree beekeepers from the country of Georgia, Ghana, Poland, and Zimbabwe, who will share their country's traditions, cultures, and practices in arboreal apiculture. And if you'd like to get more involved with Honeybee Watch, you can register any nest sites that you know of FLCs on our reporting and mapping platform. You can support what we do with a donation. And we're also looking to expand our reach into different regions with independent cells that are doing research. So if you'd like to get involved, you can contact us. And that wraps up today's symposium. So thank you very much. And we will follow up with you with the links to the video. So thank you, and we hope to see you in 3 months.
Mention about